You didn't scream. You didn't chase. You didn't play games or try to manipulate their emotions. You simply said what you felt, clearly, calmly, with a kind of emotional honesty that wasn't meant to convince them, but to honor yourself. And that's what disturbed them the most, because you didn't need them to be anything other than who they were. You didn't demand closeness. You didn't beg for a label or pressure them to give you more than they could. You just showed up, consistently, emotionally, openly. You spoke in a language they didn't know they'd been starving to hear. And that's why it haunts them now. It wasn't the volume of your voice that stayed with them. It was the resonance. It was the way you described your feelings without blaming. The way you said what hurt without accusing. The way your words carried both tenderness and strength, and didn't flinch when the silence on the other end felt unbearable. Most people yelled or shut down, but you stayed present. You let the discomfort hang in the air without running from it. You offered connection without demand. You communicated like someone who knew themselves, and that's what unsettled them. Because someone with an avoidant attachment doesn't fear love. They fear need. They fear being seen so deeply that all their defenses fall apart. And your communication, so clear, so direct, so felt, wasn't just a message. It was a mirror they couldn't look away from. You didn't use your voice to convince. You used it to witness. You described emotional landscapes they've never walked through. You named things they only vaguely sensed. You didn't attack their behavior. You unveiled the pain behind it. And in doing so, you made their patterns real, visible, uncomfortable. So they pulled away, not because you pushed too hard, but because you didn't. You didn't play small. You didn't adjust your tone to make them feel bigger. You didn't sugarcoat the truth to protect their pride. You simply told them what you saw, what you felt, what you needed, and you said it without flinching. And here's the haunting part. Now that your voice is gone, they hear it everywhere. In the spaces where silence used to feel safe. In the moments where they realize no one else sees them the way you did. In the echo of your truth, not loud, but unforgettable. Because communication like yours doesn't fade. It awakens. It lingers. It transforms long after you've left the room. And now, they're left wondering, why does your voice still echo? Even after they try to silence it? Why does your kind of communication haunt the avoidant mind? The hidden psychology of avoidant fear. To understand why your words linger in the avoidant mind, you have to go back. Not to the moment they pulled away from you, but to the moment they first learned to fear closeness. Because avoidant attachment doesn't form out of nowhere. It's built in childhood, in subtle rejections, in the spaces between what was said and what was withheld, in homes where love was offered, but only if you earned it, where vulnerability was met with discomfort, or worse, silence. Somewhere in their early life, they learned that to survive, they had to self-contain, feel less, need less, want nothing. Love became something transactional, a performance, a risk, a thing that could be revoked the moment they asked for too much. So they taught themselves not to ask. They became hyper-independent, not out of pride, but out of fear. Because every time they let someone in, they were reminded, you can be abandoned for being too close. So what looks like coldness in the present is often just a scar from the past. You see it in their body language, the way they flinch when conversations get too deep, the way they downplay emotions as drama or too much, the way they disappear right after a moment of real connection. It's not because they don't feel. It's because feeling reminds them of what they could lose. Now imagine this. Into their life walks someone like you. Someone who speaks with emotional fluency. Someone who doesn't explode or retreat, but calmly stays with the discomfort and gives it language. You say things like, "When you pull away, I feel invisible. I'm not asking for control. I just want clarity. You don't have to fix this. I just want to know how you feel." And that sends a shock through their system because they've never had a map for this kind of communication. They've only known shutdowns and blow-ups. They've only known silence, resentment, or rage. But you offer none of that. You offer stillness, and stillness terrifies them. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Your presence made the unconscious conscious. You didn't just speak to the person they presented to the world. You spoke directly to the exiled child within them, the part that never got to cry, the part that never felt safe saying, "I need you." And that's why they pulled back. Not because you overwhelmed them, but because you made them feel something they were never allowed to feel. Safe in intimacy. But the avoidant mind doesn't trust safety. It sees it as a trap, a threat, a setup for loss. So even when they wanted to lean in, they couldn't. Their nervous system was wired for distance. Their ego was trained to flinch at closeness. And your steady, emotionally intelligent communication, it disrupted the only pattern they knew. And that's the paradox. What they needed most was what scared them the deepest. Why your communication stays in their mind. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't demand anything. You didn't twist their words or guilt them into connection. You just spoke the truth, softly, directly, without ego. And in that truth was something they had never learned how to face. Because most people respond to avoidance in predictable ways. They chase, they beg, they explode, they mirror the chaos, or run from it altogether. But you did neither. You remained grounded. You stayed inside your body. You didn't speak to manipulate. You spoke to reveal. That's what lingers. That's what haunts the avoidant mind. Because they're used to people trying to control them through words. They're used to emotional outbursts followed by apologies. They're used to silence as punishment or affection as a weapon. But you didn't speak to control. You didn't speak to fix. You spoke because something in you refused to abandon itself. And that kind of communication is unforgettable. You used language to build a bridge, not a cage. And deep down, that bridge stayed with them. Even after they walked away. Even after they ghosted. Even after they tried to forget you. Because they knew the way you spoke to them was the way they always wished someone would have spoken to them when they were younger. With gentleness, with clarity, with emotional presence that didn't demand a performance. You didn't just communicate. You made them feel seen. And when someone is used to avoiding themselves, being seen feels unbearable. It's why your silence afterward was deafening. Because they weren't just missing a person. They were missing an entire emotional frequency. The safety in your voice. The way you responded instead of reacted. The way you validated feelings without needing to dissect them. These aren't just rare traits. They're healing energies. Energies that call someone out of survival and into intimacy. And once someone has tasted that, everything else feels hollow. You became a standard they can't unsee. Because your communication wasn't about clever phrasing or therapeutic language. It was about alignment. You didn't just speak honestly. You lived honestly. You modeled emotional responsibility. You asked for what you needed, not to demand, but to connect. And now, long after the conversations have ended, they still replay what you said. Not because they're obsessed, but because they're awakening. Because your words weren't designed to keep them. They were designed to set you free. And that freedom, that calm strength in your voice, that's what keeps echoing. In their mind, in their body, in the places where no one else has reached. The shift, when they begin to feel the loss. At first, they convinced themselves it was nothing. You were just another person who wanted too much. Just another emotional presence they could replace. Just another voice they could tune out, as they always have. But silence has a strange way of growing louder over time. And as the days passed, then weeks, then months, something inside them started to ache. Not for your body, not for your time, but for your way of being. They didn't realize it right away, because avoidance doesn't process through feeling. It processes through delay. They keep moving, distracting, pretending they're fine, until something cracks the surface. A scent, a phrase, a quiet moment when no one is texting, a moment of reflection in a room where no one is asking anything of them. And then, suddenly, they remember how you said things. Not what you said, but how. How you didn't punish them with silence. How you voiced your pain without blaming. How you stayed grounded, even when their distance triggered every abandonment wound you carried. And that memory? It begins to feel like a ghost. Not the haunting of someone who wronged them, but the haunting of someone who loved them right. They start comparing. Every interaction becomes a mirror. Every emotionally unavailable conversation reminds them of what they used to have, and how little they understood it at the time. Because now, when conflict arises, there's no one saying, "Let's slow down. Let's understand before reacting." There's no one offering reflection instead of reaction. No one asking, "How are you feeling, really?" They're left with emotional coldness. The very thing they used to feel comfortable inside. But it doesn't feel comfortable anymore. It feels empty. Because you didn't just hold space for them. You held space for their growth. You didn't just love who they were. You loved who they could become, if they dared to stop running. And now that you're no longer there, they begin to realize something that undoes them completely. You were the one person who saw their fear and didn't shame them for it. You spoke in a way that bypassed their defenses and reached the child behind the armor, and they let it go. They told themselves you were too intense or too emotional, but now they crave the very intensity they once dismissed, because it wasn't chaos. It was truth, and truth doesn't fade. It echoes. It reverberates through the psyche until one can no longer pretend it didn't exist. And here's what's hardest for them to accept. They didn't just lose someone they loved. They lost the mirror that was trying to help them evolve. They lost the rare kind of connection that wasn't performative, but profoundly real. And you? You didn't leave out of revenge. You left because your soul stopped, begging to be understood by someone who was committed to misunderstanding themselves. Why you were the one that changed them. They may never say it out loud. They may never send the message, never admit the truth, never risk revealing how deeply you've stayed in their thoughts. But in the quiet places they once escaped to, in the silence they used to crave, your voice remains. Not because you clung, but because you didn't. Not because you demanded, but because you spoke with a rare, disarming clarity that asked nothing except to be met. And the avoidant mind remembers that, not as a threat, but as the moment everything changed. You didn't come into their life to take anything. You came to reflect, to hold up a mirror they'd been avoiding for years, to show them that love could be safe. That conflict didn't have to mean collapse. That expression didn't have to mean exposure. And for a moment, they saw it. They saw what it would feel like to stay, to trust, to grow, to speak back in the same language you spoke in. Honest, grounded, real. But they couldn't hold it. Because real love doesn't just warm you. It confronts you. And you were confronting, not in your tone, but in your presence. You stood like a lighthouse in the middle of their storm. And when they realized they could no longer run without seeing the light again, they closed their eyes and left. But now they can't unsee you. They can't unhear the words you spoke. They can't forget the way your calm unsettled their chaos. The way your emotional intelligence made their defensiveness feel primitive. The way your stillness exposed their avoidance. You were never trying to control them. You were modeling something they never had the courage to offer back. Emotional safety. And that's what changed them. Not in the moment, but in the echo. Long after you walked away. Long after the last text went unanswered. Long after they convinced themselves they were free of you. Because you didn't break them. You broke the pattern. You made them think. You made them feel. You made them wonder what it would have been like to finally stay and be met with grace. And even if they never come back, even if they never get the chance to tell you this to your face, know this: you were the turning point. The reason they will now recognize shallow conversations for what they are. The reason future connection will feel dull in comparison. The reason they may one day choose truth. Because they tasted it once in your presence. So no, you didn't lose. You loved without losing yourself. You communicated with courage. You left when your soul grew tired of misunderstanding. And that is why you'll never be forgotten. You were the one who loved them in a language they're only just beginning to learn how to speak. So if your calm was mistaken for control, if your honesty was labeled too intense, if your emotional presence was abandoned, not because it was wrong, but because it was real, know this: your voice planted seeds they didn't know they needed. And even in your silence, you continue to teach them. You were never asking for too much. You were offering what they were too afraid to receive. And that's why you still live in their mind, not as a wound, but as a mirror. If this resonated, subscribe, because this is a space for the ones who love deeply, without losing themselves in the process. Your voice is sacred. Use it wisely, and keep speaking truth, even when it echoes in silence.